Good afternoon, everybody, and thanks very much for joining us. Today we have an opportunity to discuss an issue where I think as Americans we just don't know enough about, and that certainly includes me. But it's an issue that is moving very, very quickly, and in fact will be on the Senate floor tomorrow in the form of a piece of legislation called the Genius Act. And in order to try to do better in understanding what that legislation is about and what crypto is about, we're delighted to have Sasha Hayworth, who is the executive director of the Tech Oversight Project, and Corey Freyer, who is the director of investor protection at the Consumer Federation of America. And before they grab the mic, let me just give a brief overview as to where we are right now in general. It is, I think, no secret to the viewers that we are increasingly have a government of the billionaires, by the billionaires, and for the billionaires. And they are moving a number of pieces of their agenda forward very, very aggressively. And one especially troubled area is around cryptocurrency, which is currently worth over $3 trillion. And I think we have all seen under the Trump administration an effort to deregulate this industry in order to directly benefit the president himself, his family, and his oligarch allies. Recently, it was reported that the president would host a dinner with people who paid, in some cases, millions of dollars to purchase his meme coin. In other words, he is selling direct access to the presidency to anyone who is willing to pay up. It has also been reported that another cryptocurrency venture of President Trump has an Abu Dhabi-connected fund agreeing to invest $2 billion in his stablecoin venture, which might mean tens of millions of dollars in profits going directly to the president. And if that's not a troubling form of corruption, I don't know what is. In the face of this corruption, you might hope that Congress would step in to clamp down on what is going on and set up a strong regulatory framework for cryptocurrency. Instead, Congress is moving quickly to pass a bill called the Genius Act, which may make a bad situation much worse. So, having said that, let's bring Sasha Hayworth and Corey Freyer into the discussion. And let me begin by just asking, before we even get to the Genius Act, why don't you just summarize what cryptocurrency is about? Now, I know we have a healthcare crisis, we have a housing crisis, we have a climate crisis. What does cryptocurrency have to do in addressing any of these and other major crises facing the American people?
That's a great question. I think one important thing to realize about this is when it comes to the financial system, it ties into all of those issues with regard to healthcare and climate. So this is one of the things that sits at the base of all of that. Crypto is essentially, it is a scam. It's probably exactly what you think it is. Just like any other financial innovation, it is a way to get around the rules, to rip people off. All crypto exists on a spectrum of Ponzi schemes, and meme coins are the worst, as you mentioned, the ones that the president is selling in order to allow people to have access to him at that dinner you mentioned. Stablecoins in particular are allegedly backed by real assets, even though they're never audited, and they often lose their peg. They aren't worth $1. They fall by 13 cents, as much as 13 cents. And to compare that to traditional financial assets, if a traditional financial asset that's supposed to be worth $1 falls by 3 cents, just 3 cents, That is a complete and catastrophic failure.
All right, Corey, before we go further, don't assume that we know as much as you think we know about this issue. So I want you to back up, or Sasha can jump in as well. All right, so, I have $10,000, I got $100,000. I put that money in a CD, right? Put that money in the bank, I get, 4% interest on a CD? All right, so now I want to invest. I've heard the president is into cryptocurrency, and I have great trust and love and confidence in this presidency. So I'm going to invest in stable coins or meme coins. What's the problem here? Sasha, jump in.
The problem is that they have no intrinsic value. I mean, they're basically just little bits of digital nothing that have no basis in the financial system. They're also a haven for criminal activity because they are essentially exist online. They're very difficult to trace. It's very easy for terrorists to use cryptocurrency, particularly stablecoin, to finance activity. It's very easy for sanctioned individuals to use.
All right, I want to get there. I want to get into that area, but I want to start off with the fact that there are, I don't know, millions of Americans who think it's a good investment. So before we get into money laundering and drug cartels, why shouldn't I invest in a stable coin? Can I make money? Is it a good investment for me?
I mean, look, it's just like any collectible, right? You can buy a troll doll, you can buy a Beanie Baby, or what have you. If that's what you want to spend your money on, fine. The problem is that when you start investing in stable coin, that's supposed to be tethered to the US dollar. And that's not going to happen. It's going to be quite a financial risk, which Corey can, as the crypto expert, can speak much more heavily about. But I think as far as the actual, like what it is, what you invest in, it's like,
right.
That's when, go ahead.
All right, so Corey, let me just jump to you then. Why should I be investing in a CD rather than in a stable coin?
When your money's in a CD, it's protected by FDIC insurance. It comes with consumer protections. It comes with the ability to reverse fraudulent transactions. You get none of those protections with a stablecoin. And that's exactly why the stablecoin industry wants to get these tokens around. They want to take your money that is real, that's backed by the government, that's protected, and give you a worthless token in exchange for it.
Well, do I get any interest? I mean, if again, a CD gives me 4%, what do I get on a stablecoin?
You get no interest. The stablecoin company gets all the interest.
So explain that. All right, so I'm investing $1,000 in stablecoins. Where does the money go? What do they do with my $1,000?
So the money will go to a large crypto company like Circle or Tether, and they take your money and they buy a whole lot of maybe government assets or possibly risky financial assets.
Right, but they invest it in the way an investment company would do it.
That's exactly right. They're a giant investment company.
And what about my $1,000 for me? What do I get?
Best case scenario, you get $1,000 that remains worth $1,000.
All right. So if interest rates are if inflation is going up by 4% a year, and I sell my stable coins at $1,000 a year from now, I've lost, it's worth $960 or something like that. Is that correct?
With stable coins, the idea is to try and keep a stable price at $1. So you can't ever make money on stable coins in the upwards direction. They will never be worth more than $1. But as you pointed out, they can fall. And if unfavorable economic conditions, like you've mentioned, happen, they absolutely could be worth way less than you bought them for.
All right. So I'm giving the company $1,000. They're doing what investment companies doing it. They're investing it. They're making whatever they make, 8-10% on it. I still have at best $1,000 that I'll get a year back. Inflation has gone up by 4%. So I've actually lost money. Is that a fair summary?
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay. All right. Before we get to, all right, I have heard from folks who say, look, getting involved in crypto is an opportunity to make real money. I got my friend Joe. He invests $2,000. My God, he made $5,000 in a month. I want to do the same. What's the problem?
I mean, I would say that's the exception to the rule. I mean, there are millions of cryptocurrency, of coins out there, and not all of them are going to make you a millionaire.
All right. Well, that goes without saying. Are a lot of people losing money on their crypto investments?
Absolutely.
We found out today that in the Trump meme coin, 746,000 of his supporters who bought that meme coin lost money in that transaction.
All right, explain, we'll use the Trump meme coin above and beyond the insanity of the president of the United States issuing meme coins. Let's call it the Corey meme coin. So what happens? I buy $1,000. And what happens there?
So you think you're making a bet that the popularity of that meme coin, you'll get in first, and the popularity of that meme coin will blow up and make the price go high, and then you sell that off to somebody who's willing to pay that high price for it, and will lose money on that transaction.
Right.
What you don't know is that coin is sold to insiders first, before it ever hits the marketplace, and they benefit enormously off these price changes in a way that regular investors will never have the opportunity to.
Okay. Sasha, do you want to add anything to that?
I just wanted to add that the FBI released a report that said last year alone, of the $17 billion lost to cybercrime and online scams, nearly $10 billion of that involved crypto. And of course, we know that most crypto scams are on seniors. So it's something that that also proliferates on social media, which is, of course, how my organization and we became aware of this bill, which we'll discuss today. The cyber crimes, the hackers, the terrorist organizations, the criminals that are allowed to operate on tech platforms with impunity will be able to do so much more easily.
All right, you're leading me to another issue, and that is, so who are the guys who own the industry? Your average Joe and Mary, or who are the people who make the decisions, who make the money in crypto? Who wants to jump in? Sasha, you want to
I'll take the first part. Or so go ahead, Sasha.
No, go ahead, Corey.
Okay. Despite the claims that crypto always makes about decentralization, it's actually way, way more concentrated than the traditional financial system. So you have a handful of people like Brian Armstrong, who runs the biggest crypto exchange in the United States, Coinbase. You have a handful of people that have bought billions of dollars worth of Bitcoin. And the worst part is many of those people we can't even identify because the blockchain allows you to be anonymous. So we know there's only a few folks that own these enormous stores of crypto. We know that the companies that deal in crypto are extremely concentrated and have enormous control over the industry. And for the folks we can't identify, we know that there's outstanding billions, hundreds of billions of dollars that they own.
So this is not a democratized monetary system owned and controlled by the little people of America and the world.
I remember when crypto was first sort of rolled out, it was going to be a payment system for like farmers in, sub-Saharan Africa to be able to not have to worry about putting their money in banks so they could just operate, send money, like have money sent to them directly and completely avoid having to put their money in a vulnerable banking system there. But yeah, I haven't really seen that.
So you don't think it's really designed to benefit the farmers in sub-Saharan Africa?
No, I don't. And in fact, if this bill passes, I'm sure I'm anticipating a question you're going to ask, but I think what you ask, who will profit from it? I think one very real way that I see people profiting from stablecoins, if the Genius bill is allowed to pass, is that, you can imagine Amazon requiring you to buy Amazon products or just, you know, on Amazon's website using Amazon bucks, Bezos bucks.
Wow.
Imagine Meta requiring you to use Zuck bucks. And then functionally, that is eliminating the firewall between finance and commerce. When you're allowing a monopoly that already owns, is just so massive because of their sheer size, that knows almost everything about you and your shopping habits and where you go and who your friends are. And they can stalk your movements through apps on your mobile device and target you based on what's good for their business. And now they are requiring you to use their own currency that immediately competes with the US dollar. And even though there might not be, you know, sort of a financial burden on you, maybe you don't even notice it. You're just buying something off of Amazon or Meta. On the back end, it's being converted into Zuckbucks and then converted back, shall we say. And there's nothing to stop them from inserting price increases or rate increases on the back end that you have absolutely no control over. So it's for reasons like this that I believe, you know, Senator Hawley actually just the other day expressed concern that big tech ownership of stablecoins as a result of this bill would be one of the reasons he might oppose it as well. So this is certainly not just, you know, this is a bipartisan issue.
One of the things that kind of perked my interest in this issue is the huge amount of money that crypto has spent in campaign contributions. I mean, they're a relatively new industry, and yet I believe in the last election cycle, if I'm not mistaken, they spent over $240 million. You know, people make a big deal about Elon Musk spending $270 million to get Trump elected, which is obviously a lot, but these guys spent $240 million in a number of races, and in fact, have been successful in defeating candidates who express concern about crypto. Who wants to say a word about that?
If I could jump in on that one, I worked for Senator Sherrod Brown for 5 years. Crypto spent $40 million in Ohio to unseat him. He was one of the, you know, big fighters like Senator Sanders on this issue. Took on crypto to the bitter end, and they flexed their power in Ohio. And now, you know, we've lost that seat, and he's not able to do the work, the great work that he was doing in the Senate. That's absolutely true. Hundreds of $millions in the last election. And I think what may be even most interesting about that is they spent that money recycling, re-advertising Republican campaign ads on issues that had no relation to crypto.
That is interesting. And we see that with AIPAC as well on another issue, in that their goal was to defeat Senator Brown in this case, and they did not talk about crypto at all. Was that what I'm hearing from you? Yeah.
That's exactly right. They know crypto is incredibly unpopular. A Pew poll at the end of last year showed that 63% of Americans don't trust crypto, and 81% of Americans that have experienced with crypto don't trust crypto. This is a political DC lobbyist concern, not something that regular Americans want.
All right. All of which takes us to legislation, which I am told will be on the floor of the Senate tomorrow, the so-called Genius Act. All right. What's genius about this Genius Act? What is in it?
I mean,
Sasha, jump in, or if you, yeah, tell us about. Now, the one point that I would like to make before we get into what's in the bill or what's not in the bill is I find it remarkable that at a time when this country faces so many crises, you know, we got a housing crisis, you got a healthcare crisis, we got an education crisis, we got a wage crisis, we got income and wealth inequality crisis, that the first really major economic bill to come onto the floor of the Senate has to do with crypto, pushed, of course, by the industry. That, to me, is quite interesting. That's the power, I think, of the industry. Am I right on that?
Absolutely. It's shocking that with everything that's going on, the Senate is spending so much time on this kind of issue.
Okay, let's talk. What's in the bill? What's its goal? What do people suggest that it's going to do? What is it really doing?
Corey,
Do you want to start on the big tech angle?
Yeah. I mean, the bill essentially creates a legalized framework for big tech companies, big tech monopolies, and other powerful companies to own stablecoin, to process payments. That is essentially, as I said earlier, breaking down the firewall we've had for decades between banks and the rest of commerce. That on its own would jeopardize our financial system. It would jeopardize the economy. You're setting yourself up essentially for another taxpayer-funded bailout if and when these companies inevitably collapse.
Do you use the word, hold it, Sasha, use the word inevitably. Do you think, is that what you think, that this is a Ponzi scheme that's going to bust at some
I
point?
mean, I think it's a bubble. I think it's a bubble, and there's speculation, and in any case that's inherently risky. I think that people are going to suffer for it. The taxpayers are going to suffer for it eventually. Eventually, especially if a company like, Meta, Amazon, Google is behind the stablecoin, that company is too big to fail, right? We've heard that phrase before. Importantly as well, the many supporters of the bill argue that, at least there's some regulation. It's better than nothing. But unfortunately, the regulation that is being suggested has nothing to do with, it doesn't do anything to address the national security risks. There's no guardrails for reducing the risk of scams to seniors. There's no guardrails for reducing the terrorist financing to make it easier for them, or make it harder rather, to move money. And it especially doesn't help law enforcement move quickly to proactively identify scams or other criminal activity. Of course, the current administration has also literally taken the cops off the beat by defanging agencies like, the SEC, the CFPB, and indicating that they're not going to investigate.
I want to stay on the content of the Genius Act, but I want to detour a moment. What can one say about the President of the United States heavily involved in this industry at a moment when legislation is before the Congress? What is that about?
I mean,
go ahead, Sasha.
No, Corey, go ahead.
I think it's pure corruption. You mentioned earlier this $2 billion transaction with the firm in Abu Dhabi. There is no reason that firm needed to buy Trump stablecoins to do that transaction. There's no justification at all. They could have done that with cash. And they chose to buy the Trump stablecoin for no other reason than to gain influence with the president. And even maybe more interesting is that the firm you mentioned that entered into that transaction, that firm is chaired by the brother of the president of the United Arab Emirates, who is also their national security advisor. These conflicts of interest are terrifying, and they stretch all over the place.
And what's concerning, I would say as well, is that this administration is already brazenly advertising that, transactions can be made, that they're essentially open for business in order to buy influence. The dinner for the top holders of his meme coin, which a Bloomberg report out today actually found was mostly owned by foreigners, is also pretty brazen. And, I think we've seen a lot of the big tech CEOs make these very public capitulations to the current administration that have broadly elicited some scorn, some public opprobrium, some criticism. I'm thinking of Google changing its map to Gulf of America, and Trump buying a $24 million mansion across the street from the vice president, or Zuckerberg, rather. So those things, it's not inconceivable to think that perhaps a better business decision for them would just to buy up some stablecoin, which is much more easily concealed.
Okay. Corey, do you want to add anything to that?
I would say, you mentioned what's in the bill, and I think it's helpful to point out what is the supporters claim is in the bill, but isn't actually. Sasha mentioned these AML, or anti-money laundering provisions, that have been touted as being improved in this bill. In fact, They are just restatements of current law that already applies to these companies. There is no uptick in authority or accountability for AML, BSA, for these anti-money laundering transactions that are required of the rest of the banking industry. And these are critical things happen in the money laundering space with regard to stablecoins and cryptocurrencies.
All right, Corey, I'm a drug dealer. What does cryptocurrency mean for me? How do I benefit from that?
If you're a drug dealer, you can secretly fund drug cartels anonymously fund drug cartels with crypto. Many of the precursors for fentanyl that come across the border are bought in cryptocurrencies so that those transactions are untraceable. One of the president's first actions was pardoning a man named Ross Ulbricht. He ran Silk Road, which is a place where you could go online and spend crypto, not just for drugs, but also one of the things he was sentenced for was allowing sales of murder for hire on this crypto platform. There's no end to the kind of crimes you can perform
Murder for hire?
In this ecosystem.
People are using crypto to kill other people.
That's right.
All right, reiterate again. I've heard from some of my colleagues. Let me tell you what I have heard from some of my colleagues who are supporting this legislation. People in my community, working class people, want to make a buck. What's wrong with that? It's a growing industry. People make money. Why should they not have the opportunity to do that? Corey, why shouldn't they have the opportunity?
I do want to express a little bit of sympathy for the folks that invest in cryptocurrencies. As you know, and as you talk about a lot, there are so many problems with our current financial system. It is unfair, where people think they get ripped off. And so they see this alternative where they're seeing some, few number of people making hundreds of millions of dollars. And they think to themselves, well, I can't trust the traditional system. I might as well try this over here. The problem is that system is much, much worse than the one we have currently. As lackluster as it may be, as problematic as it may be, there are just no protections. There is no accountability for consumers and investors that find themselves involved in the crypto ecosystem.
Sasha?
I would second everything Corey has said. I also want to say that the tech platforms themselves that allow these murder for hire and transactions to take place have also no interest in proactively identifying ways to protect people from being scammed or from losing their savings. They're not holding up their end of the bargain and staffing up trust and safety departments that are supposed to track and detect online crimes. They've actually fired most of those departments. And now we see that tech platforms, especially social media, are harbor for criminal activity. Just the other day, there was a report from TTP that showed Facebook is allowing a black market in antiquities to run unchecked right in front of their noses. X has also allowed sanctioned, Russian and Iranian oligarchs to have premium accounts, which is, of course, paying X or Twitter for those accounts. And so this is in violation of many international laws. So these companies have absolutely no interest in protecting U.S. national security. They also don't have any interest in protecting your own financial security.
If I could add a really important point to Sasha's about sanctions, is that last year, the finance minister of Russia said that stablecoins were very useful in evading the sanctions that we and international groups put on them for their invasion of Ukraine. The FBI put out a report that identifies that a hacking group from North Korea called Lazarus has moved more than $2 billion of crypto and applied it to their nuclear missile program. These are enormous national security risks.
You have to laugh.
So you think I should vote against this bill, huh?
Strongly, respectfully, yes.
Okay.
And I would ask, and I would add one more thing. There's been some discussion. There was a meeting all day today with various senators. We don't know what the progress is, but has been mention of an amendment that would prohibit presidents from owning stablecoin. And whereas, I think that would be great. Let's pass it as a standalone. That does nothing to change these issues we've addressed with the bill today. Big tech ownership of stablecoins, other corporations' ownership of stablecoins is still incredibly risky to our financial and economic and national security.
Okay.
It's impossible to pass this bill until Trump and his family have divested of all of their crypto interests. We've seen him defy the Supreme Court. We've seen him take over all the regulators. No one will enforce an amendment that prevents him supposedly from operating in cryptocurrency.
Okay. All right. Any last words? Or did we cover it pretty well? All right. Corey, thank you. Sasha, thank you very much for helping to educate us on an issue of enormous consequence and an issue I think we just don't know enough about. So thank you for your work. Thanks for being with us this afternoon. See you soon.
Thanks for having us.
Okay, thank you, everybody.